North Carolina, the exit that seems to be coming from them, right? Don't have a timeline. Don't know exactly when that is. It feels like it's going to be before that 2030 deadline. Not predicting, not saying it's definite, but it feels like it's coming sooner rather than later. Drake, does that make it more likely? I was actually asked this on a show this week too. Does that make it more or less likely that Florida State and Clemson also leave before that deadline? That timeline,
I think it makes it more likely that Florida State and Clemson will follow suit with North Carolina. They need somebody to spearhead this. What I remember about January of 2023, maybe it was 2024, but I believe 2023, somewhere in that range. When we first heard tell of Florida State and Clemson wanting to get out of the ACC, it was a bombshell, and you thought, wow, $500 million is a lot, but they seem very serious about this. They're going to go to court with it, and if they're able to, they'll exit as early as possible. Reason being, they could make $15, $20 million more dollars per year in the SEC and the Big Ten, and those contracts are built for inflation, so they're more advantageous for the school long term. Come to find out, they were serious, both of those schools, about leaving the conference to the point where they've now reworked their grant of rights and reworked their ability to get out of the conference in a few years. But there was still a bit of either financial savvy or even cowardice to say we're going to do it right now. They decided to hold off, and they'll likely hold off until it drops to $75 million instead of that original $500 million that comes in 2030. But then North Carolina says, hey, for $100 million, for $125 million, we'll leave early. We've got the Jordan brand, and if we're already making 15 or 20 million more on a full share of revenue in the Big Ten of the SEC, why wouldn't we go do that? It seems to be the way that North Carolina is talking right now, and they were fourth or fifth down the line when these conversations started happening. It was Clemson, and then Florida State, and then where will Miami go? Today, North Carolina has replaced those three as this stalwart of the ACC that wants to spearhead realignment. And I think the ultimate demise of that conference, we've talked about it, 2035 is probably the real year that the ACC falls apart. But their ultimate demise lies in a school not named Florida State or Clemson taking the onus upon themselves to get out. Now that there's a little man or an underdog or an unexpected player in this that wants to lead the way, I would be really surprised if Florida State and Clemson said, yeah, North Carolina can do its own thing. We're just going to sit back and wait. I think they're the ones so passionate about a new move, they would follow suit.
Is it crazy? Here's my take, and I don't know if you agree with this or not. I think the ESPN wants to get some Belichick versus SEC matchups sooner rather than later. If North Carolina waits until 2030, like he's not there anymore. Like he's not coaching until 2030. I'll be shocked. I'll just say it like that. I think ESPN, my take has always been that the TV networks are really who's driving this boat. Now, Does Florida State and Clemson want to get out? Absolutely. Would it matter if ESPN and Fox weren't the ones like puppeteering the whole situation, right? So my take is, yes, UNC definitely wants to get out, but I can want to live in a mansion for all that I want. If I don't have somebody ready to build or buy me a mansion, it doesn't really matter how much I want it. My take is that ESPN very much wants some of these Belichick versus Kirby, Belichick versus Lane, Belichick versus Sark, Belichick versus just whoever, right? Like there's a list of characters in the SEC that'd be a lot of fun to see. I think they know they're going to get a Belichick bump, much like Fox and somewhat ESPN did when Dion went out to Colorado. And my take is that ESPN will probably help them make this happen, whether it's them helping with the buyout, whether it's them helping with, negotiating things with the ACC, whatever the situation is. That's why I think UNC will get out before 2030, if I had to guess, because I think they want to take advantage. Once Belichick leaves, even if it's the son that takes over, there will not be the same bump, right? Even if North Carolina is a perennially good team, which I don't necessarily think they'll be, not to crap on North Carolina and get their fans all upset, but I don't think they're going to just all of a sudden go to the SEC and turn into a 10-11 win team year after year after year after year. It's hard for the SEC powers to do that. So I don't think, North Carolina's ratings will drop. I think ESPN knows they got to strike while the iron's hot, and that's why I ultimately think they will help them get out faster.
The iron's not hot for very long. You already mentioned that. Bill Belichick probably gone by 2030. That seems reasonable. So if ESPN's going to move on this, wouldn't they move far quicker than that 2030, 2031 original timeline?
Sure.
I like it, and I like it because so you're a Florida State guy, right? And I'm sure you would rather see Florida State in the SEC or the Big Ten than the ACC. That's like saying, would you rather go to Yale or go to Samford, right? If you're a scholar, there's a very easy answer on that one. So I understand that's not a knock on the ACC necessarily or its detriment. You would just rather go to the big dog. To me, TJ, again, if North Carolina does this, I just don't see a world where if ESPN says, hey, you're our big dog because of Bill Belichick, I don't see a world where Clemson and Florida State don't say, hey, aren't we also your big dog? And ESPN says, well, yeah, we'll help you out. I don't think you can just hand select only North Carolina, because the second you slap Florida State or Clemson in the face, now they're more ready to go to the Big Ten, which is facilitated by Fox. And of course, ESPN would want those two schools under the ESPN umbrella. I think that's why this whole thing could happen earlier. And as much as I don't want to prey on the demise of the ACC, ultimately it is going to help the Big 12 because of the Louisvilles and the NC States and the Pitts.
Doesn't bother me to prey on their demise. Yeah, no, I agree. I think you'd get into some collusion type stuff. If they were offering something to one, you'd have to offer something to
But what is tampering? What is collusion?
Right.
What is it all?
It's only allowed in the SEC, though. So that's why I think they'd be fine with ESPN doing it. I do think that, it would speed things up. I have a hard time seeing like just a North Carolina moving like in 2027, right? I have a hard time seeing just one team, just like I really would have a hard time, even though I don't really care about any of the other teams personally, I would have a hard time just seeing FSU going in like 2027, whether it was the SEC or the Big Ten. I would think there would be a group. Now, is that a group of 2? Is that a group of 3? Is that a group of 4? I don't think it's a group of like 8 year one. I think that it takes time for some of these other programs to come up with the money and for there to be spots. And I don't think there's a North Carolina announces they're leaving and then 7 other teams announce that day. Even you mentioned like the Louisvilles and the other teams that the Big 12 may try to poach. I think there's some years that go along with that. I think the price tag in 2027 is what 18 times 3 is 36 plus the 75, 111 million. Like I don't know that Louisville can afford that 9 digits up front to be able to do that. And then anyone else too, right? Like you're going down the pecking order of like, well, who would be next? Pitt, not Boston College, Virginia Tech. Like are we really going to come up with $300 million from the Big 12 to be able to get those teams in 2027? So I think that they may move, but it'll probably be a couple of years down the road, maybe closer to that 2030 timeline. Maybe ESPN is able to shift some things around and help some of these teams negotiate and get numbers down even further. But I think I'm in full agreement. I think that North Carolina moved. Florida State, and I do think Florida State fans and Clemson fans are even kind of looking at North Carolina like, hey man, where were you the last 2 years? Like where were you when we took all the daggers, when we were taking all this the arrows for doing this? Where were you when we were laying it on the line to get you this pathway? So I do think there's some hypocrisy and Florida State fans and Clemson. But all that said, whoever can get out first, that's probably good for everyone else. And I think Florida State and Clemson will benefit the most in the short term. They're going to do better TV ratings over a 5-year span than North Carolina or Miami or any of these, Georgia Tech, any of these other teams. So it was worth it for Florida State and Clemson to spend the money to get the benefit. But at this point, I think you have to put aside all the other stuff and just say, man, if North Carolina can get out in 2026, like if they can announce before this deadline with the ACC, great. Because that means we're not far behind. Are we a year behind? Are we 2 years behind? Whatever. It doesn't matter. As soon as North Carolina can get out, better for everybody else kind of following suit.
Better for the Big 12. And I don't think North Carolina is a Big 12 brand, but I do believe, again, if you're looking at Virginia Tech or Pitt or Louisville, who likely aren't going to those Power 2, the Big 12's right there to catch them, and it only is going to make this conference better.